So for those of you who watched my last video, I said I was going to go over the journal page of the triangular numbers. So I'm actually going to have that as a bonus. If you want to do it, you can. I did not realize that this particular lesson has 3 journal pages when most only have 1 or 2. And I thought doing 3 plus the math boxes plus the mental math and math message was just too much for one day. So you are only required to do the journal page that I just had the last video on, which was on rectangular numbers, and then this one that's plotting and analyzing swim data, and then the math boxes. Okay, so let's look at what information they are giving us. So it says on Monday, the swim team coaches kept track to the nearest half mile of how many miles each team member swam. The following data were collected. Fill in the missing numbers on the horizontal axis of the line plot. So that's just a fancy way of saying this part. That's the horizontal axis. Then plot the data set. So first we have to look and figure out what is our minimum and what is our maximum amount that they swam. So I'm going to look at all of these numbers and see which is the minimum and which is the maximum. And actually, the people who created this journal page were very nice, and they put them in order for us. So here's the minimum, and here's the maximum. So now I have to fill in the values on my horizontal axis. So I know the minimum is 1 1/2. And then I'm going to increase by 1/2 mile. Because remember, the increments between each mark have to be the same. So 2 1/2 plus 1/2 would be 3, plus 1/2 would be 3 1/2, plus 1/2 would be 4, plus 1/2 would be, oh, I'm sorry. I want to start off with 2, and then 2 1/2, and then 3 1/2. Let me rewrite that one. Plus another 1/2 would be 4, plus another 1/2 would be 4 1/2, and plus another 1/2 would be 5. So now we have to give our line plot a title. So what is this data showing us? It is showing us Monday's swim data. If you had a different title, that is totally okay. And then this line on the bottom tells us what do these numbers mean to somebody who didn't get to read the problem itself. So those numbers represent the number of miles to the nearest half mile. Now I'm going to take all of these data points and I'm going to plot them on my line plot. And I always tell my students, cross off the data point once you plot it so you don't put one in twice. So here's 2 1/2, so I'm going to cross it off and put an X. Another 2 1/2, 3 1/2, 4 1/2, 5, and here's another 5, 4 1/2, 3 1/2, 4, 2 1/2, 3, 4 1/2, and then 4 1/2. Okay, so now I plotted all of my information onto my line plot. So now I have to answer these questions. It says use the completed line plot, which we did, to answer the questions. Find the difference between the greatest and least number of miles each person swam. So I know the greatest number of miles that somebody swam was 5, because 2 people swam 5 miles. And the next smallest number is not 2, it's 2 1/2. Because 2 1/2 has 3 people that swam that, and nobody swam 2 miles. So I'm going to do 5 minus 2 1/2. And we would put the M for miles. And if I did 5 minus 2 1/2, I would get 2 1/2 miles. All right, 2. How many miles were swum all together by those who swam 3 1/2 miles? So I'm going to look. How many people swam 3 1/2 miles? Well, I see that 2 people swam 3 1/2 miles. So to find out how much they swam all together, I would add 3 1/2 plus 3 1/2. I know that 2 halves equal a whole, so 1 plus 3 is 4, plus another 3 is 7. So in total, they swam 7 miles. How many miles were swum all together by those who swam 2 1/2 miles? So I know that 3 people swam 2 1/2 miles. So you could do this 2 ways. You could do 3 times 2 1/2 or 2 1/2 plus 2 1/2 plus 2 1/2. Okay, and if you were to add or multiply, you would get 7 1/2 miles. How many miles were swum altogether from those who swam 4 1/2 miles? Well, 4 people swam 4 1/2 miles. So you would do 4 1/2 times 4, which equals N. And if you were to do that multiplication problem, you would get 18 miles. How many miles were swum all together by the 6 team members who swam the least amount of miles? The least amount of miles. So we know that 3 people swam 2 1/2 miles, and then 3 people swam 3 miles. So that's the first 6 team members. How would I write that? Well, I could do 3 to represent the 3 people times 2 1/2, how far they went, plus the 3 people that swam 3 miles, and S for swam. So if I did all of that, you would split this up into 3 times 2 plus actually, I'm going to change this to a mixed number, sorry. Okay, so if I change this to a mixed number, it's 4 times 3, which would give me 4 times 3, which is 12, over 2. I'm sorry, I just put that over 6, over 2, sorry. And it would be 5 over 2. Miss Mold's brain is not working today. And I would get 15. If I did 3 times 5 halves, you multiply the whole number times the numerator, and that would be 15 halves, which is actually equal to 7 1/2. And then you would do, they don't give me any room. Sorry, guys, I'm really trying to squeeze it in on the bottom here. 3 times 3, which is 9. I'm going to rewrite this here, which is 9, plus 7 1/2. And you would get 16 1/2. I really hope that made sense, guys. Sorry, I really tried to squeeze it on the bottom here. But I would recommend using a scrap paper where you can have more room. Okay, so that's it for the last journal page. In the next video, I'm going to go over the math boxes.